Coming at you with a timely video. By now you're probably sick of hearing about Charles Entertainment Kirk. I know I am. I was sick of hearing about him years ago, but I'm way sicker of it now that he's been murdered. I don't want to talk about this. Everybody's already talked about it. And we're all sick of debating whether we need to be civil about him. Sick of the apologetics done to present him as a harmless advocate of free speech and open debate, as though the contents of his speech and what he debated in service of are irrelevant. I don't want to participate in a tiresome, feckless debate about whether one must be civil in the face of a personal tragedy befalling an evil dipshit. From my tone, you can probably determine my position on that. Nor do I want to spend this time dancing on his grave, because as much as I disliked the man, on balance, I do tend to dislike targeted political assassination less. But beyond that, his death creates a lot of problems for everyone else that we are clearly not prepared to handle. More on that later. Not that I really need to explain what I mean by that anyway, because you're a person on the planet, you've read a news headline in the last 2 weeks, you know what I'm talking about. No, I have a much simpler purview for this video. To ask, why do libs feel the need to defend Charlie Kirk and those like him? Now I get why right-wingers do. I understand what they get out of it. He's their guy after all. They want to sanitize his image and do this whole myth-making process to have a martyr they can use to justify all of the horrible shit they clearly wanted to do anyway. Makes perfect sense. No questions there. But libs? Libs are supposed to dislike this kind of stuff. Why are they participating in this process? Why are they so reverent? I get why they're like condemning Charlie's murder. That makes sense. Like, I get why they'd be quick to say, hey, yo, we don't want to see people get killed, even people we don't like. No notes. I don't have a problem with that. In abstract, I agree with it, actually. And so, like, let me be careful in how I phrase this. On account of YouTube's terms of service, because like it's really easy to be snide and callous, as I will prove throughout this video when I am snide and callous. But and I might not personally have cause to grieve the death of this evil shithead. I don't want to be perceived, however, as celebrating his murder. It's sad when people are murdered. Like, my heart goes out to his family and kids and all that, and nobody deserves to lose a loved one. Assassination is a bad thing. We don't like it, do we, folks? But all of that having been said, let us not mince words. Each day, Charlie Kirk rolled out of bed and worked tirelessly to make the world less safe, to raise the temperature, to make political violence more commonplace, acceptable, and lauded. He expressly did not give a shit about the victims of gun violence. He encouraged others not to give a shit about them either. He quite explicitly said that he felt that gun deaths were an acceptable sacrifice in the name of protecting the Second Amendment.
I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year, so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights.
He said that feeling empathy for mass shooting victims allowed them to, quote, hijack the narrative. Hijack it from whom? Who else would this narrative belong to? In fact, he believed people shouldn't really care about others at all, just like in general.
Empathy and sympathy. I can't stand the word empathy, actually. I think empathy is a made-up New Age term that it does a lot of damage, but it is very effective when it comes to politics. Sympathy I prefer more than empathy. That's a separate topic for a different time.
So, the man we are meant to be having empathy for, to respect the beliefs of, literally believed empathy was damaging nonsense. It's actually an insult to his memory to have empathy for him, which is one of the reasons why I try to do it. There has seldom existed such a high-profile and explicit advocate of arbitrary political violence. Kirk celebrated political violence done to his enemies. When Paul Pelosi was attacked in his home by a hammer-wielding intruder, Charlie Kirk called for a, quote, patriot to bail out the attacker. He celebrated Trump's occupation of D.C., calling for shock and awe, force, and referred to the people being targeted as cockroaches, very specific language that may not have been a deliberate invocation of Nazi rhetoric, but very much accords with it. And he was, of course, an explicit Zionist and defended the genocide in Gaza, where hundreds of thousands of people have been murdered so far.
You know, it's funny, I used to say that, hey, if you as a gay person would go to Gaza, they'd throw you off of tall buildings, right? Now they don't have any tall buildings left, so I don't... Is that too soon? I'm sorry. Maybe you shouldn't kill Jews, stupid Muslims.
So much so, in fact, that Israeli Prime Minister and international war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu tweeted his grief over Charlie Kirk's death, referring to Kirk as a lion-hearted friend of Israel. He routinely targeted vulnerable people, and I'm not talking about like populations of people here, though obviously he did that as well. I'm talking about specific individuals. He weaponized his platform of millions to direct bigoted harassment towards lists of educators, supposedly brainwashing the nation's youth, stirring up hate and making the listed people the targets of harassment and potential violence. His political project, his goals and aspirations were uniformly violent, uniformly barbaric. He believed in state-sponsored murder for LGBTQ plus people.
Is in Leviticus 18 is that thou shalt lay with another man shall be stoned to death. Miss Rachel, you quote Leviticus 19, love your neighbor as yourself. The chapter before affirms God's perfect law when it comes to sexual matter. Lay with another man shall be stoned to death. God's perfect law when it comes to sexual matter.
He believed in forcing children who've been the victims of rape to be made to give birth to their rapist's baby.
So if you had a daughter and she was 10 and she got raped, would you want her to go through that and carry her rapist baby?
That's awfully graphic.
But it's a real life scenario that happens to many people.
The answer is yes, the baby would be delivered.
He believed in repealing the Civil Rights Act because he viewed people of color as innately inferior.
I'm sorry, if I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified. I want to be as blunt as possible because now I'm connecting two dots. Wait a second, the CEO has said that he's forcing that a white qualified guy is not going to get the job. So I see this guy, he might be a nice person. I say, boy, I hope he's not a Harvard-style affirmative action student that has points for, and he landed half of his flight simulator trials.
To put it bluntly, Charlie Kirk spent his short life in service of specifically creating the aggressive and violent conditions which went on to kill him. To wit, almost all domestic terrorism in the United States is committed by white supremacists and other far-right extremists, almost all of whom would share 99% of their political DNA with Charlie Kirk. And that isn't speculation, by the way. According to a paper from the Department of Justice, since 1990, far-right extremists have committed far more ideologically motivated homicides than far-left or radical Islamist terrorists, including 227 events that took more than 520 lives. In the same period, far-left extremists committed 42 ideologically motivated attacks that took 78 lives. That paper, by the way, has been removed from the Department of Justice's website in the wake of Charlie Kirk's death and the subsequent crackdown on far-left violence that most likely had nothing to do with it. His death should serve as the strongest possible repudiation of his life's work and beliefs, a demonstration that the wages of hate are violence and death. He quite literally died under a banner which read, "Prove me wrong." How explicit does the universe need to be with its symbolism? It's critical that we make that clear, because good God, have Charlie's bedfellows exploited his death to advance that hateful, violent project. The myth of Charlie Kirk is this peaceful champion of the free expression of ideas, which is being actively written right now, is being used to stomp down on dissent, violate people's rights, and escalate tensions. More Charlie Kirks, and more thought slimes for that matter, will die as a direct result of this. Okay, so with that preamble out of the way, I can move on to the question I wanted to ask in this video. Why are libs like this? How come? Why are they tripping over their own dicks, not to simply condemn Kirk's assassination, but to proactively contribute to his post-mortem sanitization? Why are they so ready, nay, eager to comply with this narrative? What are they getting out of it? How come libs? How come you're like this, libs? Why are you so servile, so willing to do whatever your enemies want you to do every single time? Why is it so easy to get them all to stand in single file and step up to the podium and say, Charlie Kirk was cool and good and my best friend and I wanted to suck his dick and I don't think he ever believed anything bad ever? Why are you so fucking useless all of the time, always? Now, please understand that when I say libs, I don't necessarily mean liberals, not exclusively anyway. I mean it in the sense that all hyper online leftists like me use it, which is that it's anyone who's being annoying. No, not really. But look, I could be more specific than that, but I think you kind of get it, right? Liberalism is a specific ideological position with specific characteristics, but I'm not really talking about that. I'm not talking about Hobbes and Keynes and shit. I'm not talking about liberals necessarily. Though, I am predominantly talking about liberals, of course. When I refer to libs, I'm talking about something broader than that, something a bit more difficult to define. We're talking about people who take for granted that the liberal democratic status quo is the natural order to which we will always inevitably return, and whose political imaginations are limited to, more or less, what exists right now with maybe some small changes here and there. Usually highly educated, otherwise intelligent people who have somehow completely lost touch with the modern political landscape and the threats which face them. I have described this phenomenon in the past as the liberal mind prison, how liberalism itself functions not just as a set of beliefs, but also as the boundaries of what beliefs a mind is allowed to hold. But this logic isn't limited to just ideological liberals, not really. You see this everywhere once you start looking for it, from what Mark Fisher called capitalist realism to Francis Fukuyama declaring the end of history. There's something about libs which makes them believe that we've arrived at some sort of invincible stability, that things will always be more or less like they are now. We can't even imagine a future that deviates too much from the structure of our current lives. I say we because I think libism, a term which is distinct from liberalism because I made it up and I therefore get to say what it means, is not so much a political ideology as a bad habit that anyone, myself included of course, can fall into. A lib isn't a thing that you are, it's a thing that you're being sometimes. Sometimes leftists are being libs. Sometimes fascists are being libs. Sometimes your dad is a lib. Sometimes Spider-Man is a lib. Everyone is libs once in a while. Let's all work on not being libs all the time. A lib believes that politics doesn't really change all that much. Any belief system which strays too far from the status quo reads to them as purely hypothetical and abstract. It's why they dismiss leftists and leftist propositions out of pocket for not being serious, because any systemic change on its face is unserious. You can't make big changes. We've arrived at the final form of government, and all that's left is to make some minor patches along the way. We maintain the current order. We don't seek to create a new order, because that simply can't be done. Nothing can defeat the current order, and anything which does will inevitably collapse and return to the current order very shortly. This makes libs extremely, frustratingly unable to confront extremism of any kind. If you take it for granted that big changes are just flat out impossible, then any argument about big changes is just a matter of opinion and won't have an effect on the world one way or another. It's a hypothetical, a discussion to be had in the abstract that will have no effect on the real world. Nobody can be hurt by that except their feelings, I guess. So as long as everyone's being polite, as long as we're all being nice and not emotionally provocative, what does it matter if we just have a difference of opinion, no matter what that opinion might be? I mean, come on, it's not like they can do anything about it, you know? It's all simply a discussion, an exchange of ideas. Charlie Kirk, like most right-wing media figures, was really good at manipulating this weakness. Not because he was slick or particularly compelling, because it's just really easy to exploit. He would frame his arguments carefully to make his provocations to violence clear enough to his audience, but always to maintain plausible deniability, to limit himself to the abstract, distant proposals, things that he knew liberals would disagree with, but dismiss as impossible. Now make note, of course, he's hardly alone in this. We do this on the left all the time. We know that when we call to end capitalism on a platform owned by a multi-trillion-dollar corporation, they let us get away with it because on some level, they don't really take it seriously. It does not read to them as a genuine threat because they don't really believe it's possible. But if I were to say we should kill Dr. Steve YouTube, the chief engagement officer of YouTube, I would go to jail for that. Rightfully so, right? Because I tried to murder a guy. For the record, Dr. Steve YouTube is a fine man, a brave man. And just because almost every single choice made by the leadership of this website is terrible, doesn't mean that I cannot be friends with Dr. Steve YouTube MD. Kirk understood he couldn't call for violence directly. That would break the rules. That would be a clear violation. That's immediate. And even libs know things like that are real threats. He'd just smile and calmly lay out the moral justification for violence to be done, granting his audience moral permission to engage in violence without ever being on the hook for it himself. He wouldn't say something as crass as, "Go stone gay people, everybody." That would be incitement. No, he'd simply say that we should live in accordance with the teachings of the Bible. And the Bible says we should do that if you consciously ignore the much more numerous and direct parts of the Bible which say explicitly not to do that. He'd leave his audience to connect the dots, but was savvy enough never to connect them himself, making all of his violent rhetoric implication and subtext. And to libs, again, not liberals necessarily, but libs, there's a big, important distinction between saying we should stone gay people, bad, violent, dangerous, and it's my personal religious conviction that we should amend the law to make the punishment for being gay a stoning. Merely insulting, suggestive, buffoonish. Now sure, they wouldn't like that he said the latter. They might find it disgusting, but it's not dangerous. It could become dangerous if a critical mass of people came to believe it, but that's too big a change to expect to happen anytime soon. It's outside the scope of what they imagine is possible, so why worry about it? In their minds, the damage done by this kind of rhetoric is exclusively emotional. It's hurtful, it's dehumanizing, it makes people feel bad. And so they condemn it with the strongest possible wag of the finger, but it's not in and of itself like violent, right? Any violence being discussed here is just hypothetical. We don't need to concern ourselves with it as anything other than a thought experiment. It's not a threat in the real world, it's just a bad take. We can discuss this rationally because as long as it all stays within the realm of opinion, nobody gets hurt. To them, being confrontational to such an idea is just as bad as holding that idea. Because remember, the only thing they really see wrong with it is that it might hurt people's feelings. So if you hurt Charlie's feelings by telling him he's a piece of shit with bad ideas, you've done the exact same thing to him that he's doing to queer people. The only way to defeat him and the things he stands for, therefore, is by being welcoming and accepting, even when you know he's going to use that acceptance to advocate for terrible things. It's simply the civil way to behave. And if we just do that, all of the problems just work themselves out somehow. This is why Ezra Klein will say dumb shit like Kirk practiced politics the right way. The contents of his opinions, the actual things he advocated for, are irrelevant to the way that he practiced politics. All that matters is that in advocating for those things, he gave the appearance of politely discussing abstractions, talking about, but never acting on, his bigoted and demented worldview. To the lib, politics is not about the expression of power. It's about the expression of self. It's an in-group to belong to. It's a fandom, a way to validate your feelings and beliefs, to signal to others that you have the good ideas, the ideas that people like. Whether those ideas actually amount to change is decided by how far from the eternal, natural status quo a lib believes them to be. The march of progress inevitably brings us closer and closer to the perfect world that we're all working together to build. And so bad ideas simply require gentle correction, not direct confrontation. Think of the term marketplace of ideas, right? Like they present this as a market stall where people can pick good or bad ideas. And of course, people are rational actors according to market logic who would naturally gravitate to the good ideas. The good ideas just outcompete the bad ideas. You don't really need to do anything other than present a better idea to defeat a bad idea because it's just going to be innately more popular. But if you're not terminally capitalism-brained, there's a problem that is going to leap out at you in this analogy. Good ideas can't always afford think tanks and public relations people. They're not always funded by petrochemical billionaires. Good ideas might win in a fair fight, but why the fuck would people fight fair when their money is on the line? It also presents ideas, politics, ideology as simply a product to consume, a marker of identity and vehicle for self-expression, rather than the means by which change is made. It's all just a great big exercise in open-mindedness with no tangible effect whatsoever. And this is why they fixate so much on crassness, on the coarsening of the discourse, because it's really the only thing they can criticize. That erodes trust in the discussion that they think will inevitably and always prove them correct. There's a set of rules that if were obeyed, they would always win. And the problem is that people simply aren't obeying the rules. We must force them to obey the rules by being nicer and more polite. If you can say horrible things politely, that's what you're supposed to do. That's what they want. Because like if you say the bad ideas, they can then outcompete them with their better good ideas. It's brand management. When they're rude, it lets you do negative PR on their ideas. And when you're rude, it grants them the same opportunity. So you're not just someone that believes something. You don't just express your thoughts willy-nilly. You must always carefully consider the optics. Because you're a brand ambassador for whatever thing you believe. You're trying to sell it. You're trying to be appealing. We don't want to lose normal people. We have to consider the demographics. You're not included in the demographics. It would never occur to them that this back and forth could have the effect of making bad ideas more popular. Because in the mind of the lib, bad ideas simply don't get more popular. Anyone who holds a bad idea simply has not been exposed to the good alternative yet. And once they are, they'll always choose it. Someone has failed to explain this sufficiently to the dum-dums. Once the dum-dums hear it laid out for them as simply as possible, then they're all going to jump to our better ideas. And this also means that if an idea does get more popular, it therefore must have some merit. I mean, if you're taking this free market logic for granted, if you assume that it's baked into how people behave, The only reason a bunch of rational actors would choose an idea would be if there's something to it that we're not seeing. We're obligated to hear them out endlessly until we either convince them they're wrong or they convince us we're wrong. All ideas are therefore worth hearing out forever, because the bad ones just go away naturally once exposed. No matter how many times the strategy backfires, they'll never, ever lose faith in it, because it affirms their innate sense of superiority, that their ideas and their worldview is so self-evidently better than others, nobody could be exposed to it without being converted. Because all libs really want out of all of this is to feel good about having already made the right choices, about believing the right things. Only small changes are possible, and so the stakes are therefore perpetually small, perpetually unworrying. The system will protect them, and the system cannot be broken. In a weird way, I think Charlie Kirk also kind of gives them that sense of superiority, because he's their heel. He's the mouthpiece for the bad ideas that they don't like. He's always there to say the wrong thing, to endorse the wrong policies and argue in their defense, but never to actually complicate that simple relationship by doing anything himself. The plausible deniability he maintained also allows a lib to delude themselves into thinking that he could not be dangerous to them, because he didn't break their rules, he didn't violate their norms, and so any danger he posed was abstract, imagined, easily countered simply by presenting your superior ideas. How brave of him to be willing to subject himself to that over and over. We should applaud him for having the courage to put himself in this position. Sure did it a lot. And that's great. That's great for us, because we want him to do that, because it's bad for his side, bad for his project, which, come to think of it, makes it kind of weird that he did it so much. Like, it's weird that he'd be so into it if it's bad for him. It's almost like he got something out of this process. It's almost like it helped him in some way. It's almost like this wasn't an exercise in the free exchange of ideas, but an opportunity for a fringe extremist to make his bigoted positions more mainstream, one which credulous libs happily played along with, one which they're all too ready to continue playing along with in the wake of his murder, because they find the idea of normalizing him and the toxic fascist project he represents more acceptable than having to endure being called an asshole on Twitter. Hey, thank you for watching this video that I thought would just be a quick one I could do on a current event, and then it wasn't a current event anymore, and now it's just a video I made saying stuff that a bunch of people have already said. But again, please like it and subscribe to me. These are my requests of you. I would also ask that if you were so inclined and able to, you could go to Patreon, which is where I get my money, and you could give some to me. But don't do it if you can't. But if you can and want to, then go ahead. I'm not your dad. I'm not your boss. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I will say that I'd quite like it. I could spend it on various goods. Have I talked long enough that, like, it covers the credits?